Emily Griffith is kind of like working class nobility.
Emily Griffith was our most fascinating and most helpful teacher ever. It's remarkable in women's history as well as educational history that a woman would rise this far and also endear herself to the community.
She took charge. She was very innovative. In fact, she was probably one of the most innovative educators of her time, was just a pioneer in her field. She provided opportunities for all who wish to learn.
She was one of the rare people who absolutely lived for other people.
After a life of accomplishment, Emily Griffith's life took a strange twist.
JonBenet Ramsey's not the only case that Boulder Police Department has never figured out.
To this day, we still speculate on what exactly happened.
This program was funded by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with support from the Denver Public Library and History Colorado, with additional funding and support from these fine organizations. And viewers like you, thank you.
Every day that I'm out there in the general public, I hear a story about how Emily Griffith has touched someone in their life. There's always a story about, you know what, my grandmother got her start in accounting there at Emily Griffith, and you know what, my cousin went through your welding program, or my brother dropped out of high school, came back, got his GED at Emily Griffith, and now he's doing great, and that's pretty powerful.
She made education accessible to all in Denver at the turn of the century, at a time of incredible poverty, large-scale immigration, people coming in and trying to find their footing in a place like Denver, where life could be very unforgiving. Emily Griffith was there to provide opportunity. Emily Griffith's own story is a story of the American dream.
Emily K. Griffith was born in 1868 in Cincinnati, Ohio, the second of 4 children to Andrew and Martha Griffith. She had an older brother, Charles, and 2 younger sisters. In the early years, Emily's father was trained as a lawyer, but apparently he wasn't a very good one, partly because sometimes his conscience got in the way and he couldn't bring himself to defend people that he didn't think were really in the right. So that career sort of fizzled, and he began in her youth becoming what they called a missionary. He didn't go overseas or anything, it was just locally, but he was selling Bible tracts kind of door to door and that type of thing. Not terribly lucrative. The family really struggled financially, and they moved quite frequently when she was growing up. So her education was consistently interrupted, and she'd have to start over, or she'd have to go quite a while without schooling. So it took her a little longer to get through the early grades. Emily's father had a big role in giving her a moral compass as she was growing up, because he was a missionary. She also was inspired by an uncle that she had who ran a boat on the Erie Canal and who used to park that boat in the evenings and hang out a lantern and a sign that said, "For all who wish to learn." And he offered classes to anyone in the area who wanted to learn reading or basic math. That was kind of the beginning of Emily's idea of education for everyone, no matter what age or background they might have.
As a young girl, they moved out to Nebraska.
Custer County, Nebraska. Her father was lame, her mother was a bit of an invalid, so while they tried to prove up the homestead, it fell to her and her older brother Charles to try and help support the family. Emily, having finally completed the 8th grade at the age of 16, decided that teaching was the way for her to go.
She starts teaching in a one-room sod building, grades 1 through 8. A lot of these farm boys are a lot taller than her, but they learned to respect her, even though she's rather demure, auburn hair, blue eyes though, but she won them over.
The custom in those days for the school teacher to board around. In other words, she would spend 2 weeks at a time living with the families of her various students. So she really got to know not just her students, but their families. And it was during this period that she began to realize that a lot of the parents of her students needed basic education just as much as the students themselves. Sometimes they would ask her to read from the Bible in the evenings because the parents could not read. Sometimes they would ask her to figure up the bill from the local general store because they didn't know math and they didn't know if they had been cheated or not. And also during this time, 3 out of 5 homesteaders in Nebraska were foreign-born or first generation of foreign-born, so they didn't have a real great grasp of English. In those days, there was no such thing as public adult education, and Emily resolved that there ought to be a place where people of any age or background could come to learn the basic things they needed to succeed in life. She was 27 years old, and in that day, that would have been considered what they'd call a spinster. And spinsters were viewed rather suspiciously at the time, because if you were a relatively attractive young woman and you had chosen not to marry, because she did have several proposals of marriage, people kind of looked at you askance. They wondered what was wrong, because people did not choose a career over marriage in the Victorian age. So when they moved to Denver, Emily took this opportunity to give herself not really a clean slate, but an adjusted slate. And when she applied to teach at Denver Public Schools, on the application she gave a date of birth that made her not 27 years old, but 15. She shaved 12 years off of her actual age. And she got away with it because she always had the cherub cheeks and she looked very young. And she stuck to that lie for the rest of her life. There was a downside to this rejuvenation because as a 15-year-old, she could not realistically claim the nearly 10 years of teaching experience that she had. So she had to kind of start back from ground zero. She had to begin as what they called alternate teacher, like a substitute teacher, go through normal training and all of that before they gave her a classroom of her own. So it had its downside. In 1908, the Colorado Department of Education realized that for someone so young and inexperienced, she was really a good teacher. So with administrative brilliance, they took her out of the classroom and made her the Deputy State Superintendent of Schools. She actually had an office in the state capitol. This was from 1908 to 1910. And in this position, she did a lot of traveling around the state, visiting schools around the state. And every chance that she got, she would talk about her idea of expanding public education to include adults and people of all ages. So she's getting a chance here to campaign for her ideas and to talk to really influential people who could help make such a thing happen. 1910, she goes back to the classroom for a couple of years. Now she's teaching at the 24th Street School in the 5 Points neighborhood.
She started being very concerned about the older siblings of her students and their parents. Most of them are only getting 8th grade education. A lot of the parents are immigrants. They can't even speak English.
They called her the little mother of 24th Street because she, took on the care of all these families. She decides at this point to begin offering on her own time during lunch hours and in the evenings classes for her working students and for their parents who want to come to just learn basic skills, probably a little bit of English. So this is kind of the beginning of her doing it completely on her own, offering this type of thing to people who are really desperate to learn these things to improve their lives. She's back in administration from 1910 to 1912, this time as Deputy State Superintendent of Public Education. Again, pushing her ideas. After that, she's back in the classroom once again from 1914 on. Emily actually had 2 sisters, and the one just younger than her, 3 years younger than her, Florence. Back in their day, Florence was characterized as feeble-minded. Today, we would probably say that she had some sort of a learning disability. Emily always used to say she was less able than most to cope with life's complexities.
She always had problems with strokes, seizures, and yes, her younger sister would be living with Emily for the rest of their lives.
Emily Griffith was universally described as sweet-natured, kind, very articulate. She was a little vain. She dressed nicely. She lied about her age to make herself appear younger than she actually was. But what everybody recognized and valued about her was her intense compassion for everyone around her.
Everyone said she had a very sunny disposition. She was very friendly. She loved people and was beloved in return.
I picture a woman who made an impression, but yet was very humble. at the same time, which I think is a delicate balance.
Auburn hair, blue eyes, rather attractive. She would turn down suitors constantly, though, and pretty much dedicated to her profession and caring for her invalid sister.
She did get a lot of proposals of marriage, apparently, when she was, teaching on the prairie. They think that probably the love of her life was a soldier who was killed. So based on that, she kind of turned her affections onto her students and her career, and that's probably why she dedicated everything to that.
She certainly wasn't this sit back and let things happen on their own woman. She took charge. She was very innovative. In fact, she was probably one of the most innovative educators of her time, certainly. Created some educational pathways that didn't previously exist for adults, if you will. And because of her work, she was much studied, not only nationally, but internationally, and was just a pioneer in her field.
One of the amazing things about Emily Griffith is she didn't see race, she didn't see class, she saw individuals. At a time when most Americans were extremely race conscious, were extremely class conscious. Denver in the 19-teens was a manufacturing town, it was an agricultural hub, it was a mining supply center. It was growing quickly as new waves of immigrants came in looking for jobs in the railroads and in the smelters and in the beet fields outside of Denver.
A flood of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe coming in. Before this, it was mostly German immigrants coming into America and Denver. Greeks and Italians and Slavs and Russians working in the smelters, toiling long hours a day down there. Many of them are working for minimal wages, maybe $2 to $3 a day, 12 hours a day. If you were hurt on the job, you were fired. At this time in America, broken machines were repaired, broken men were thrown away. There were disposable means of production.
Big turning point comes at Christmas time in 1915. Emily takes a group of her 8th grade students from the 24th Street School to the Denver Post annual Big Brothers Big Sisters Christmas Charity Drive. This is where impoverished children can get winter coats and hats and gloves, etc., that have been donated by the community. Emily stays behind and helps kind of clean the place up with the reporter who was in charge of that charity. Her name was Frances Wayne. She went by the nickname of Pinky. She talked with Pinky Wayne about her idea for this public education, her idea for a school, she said, where the clock is stopped from morning till night, where working children and their parents too can come whenever they have an hour or two in the day to learn the things they need to improve their prospects and their future. Frances Wayne was very taken with this idea. She was very influential in the community, and she convinced not only her editors at the Denver Post, but many community leaders of the merits of this idea. And a lot because of her efforts, on May the 11th, 1916, Denver Public Schools finally decided to approve this experimental idea that Emily had, and she already had a name for the school. It was Opportunity. They made Emily the principal. She suddenly shifts all her years of persuasion to promotion to try and recruit some people who might want to attend this school.
What was revolutionary about the Opportunity School was that it was literally a school for anyone. There was no age restriction, there was no economic restriction, there was no grade restriction. Everyone was welcome at the Opportunity School. And so that meant that if you were an immigrant laborer with a day job, you could still attend night classes to get vocational training or to learn English or to do any number of things that expand your capacity, expand your horizons, and allow you to climb up the ladder in American life.
And it was free. It was an amazing thing where you learned job schools. First of all, you learned English, learned to read and write English, and then learned some skill.
So when the school opened on September 9th, 1916, she had no idea how many people would come. She optimistically hoped for about 200 people.
She was really nervous about starting the school and thinking, well, I have this vision, and I think it's going to be a good idea, but the reality is anybody going to show up? And she thought there may be a couple hundred people that first year, and the reality is there were about 1,400 people that showed up that first week for classes. So it's obviously filled the need, and it was a huge success right out of the gate. She was a true ambassador. She was a true advocate, and the fact that she wasn't afraid to talk to anyone and talk about the mission of the school.
Emily Griffith was the queen of the soft sell. She knew how to charm people into giving her what she wanted. She was a master of public relations. She cultivated very close relationships with Pinky Wayne, a reporter from the Denver Post, and other reporters who would give her good publicity and good press. She was persistent. She charmed like nobody's business, and she completely understood the value of PR.
The Emily Griffith Opportunity School grew over the years to occupy the whole block between 13th and 14th and Welton and Glenarm Place.
She said it was not a place for nervous teachers because people would be dropping in and out all day long. They're at all different levels of achievement and looking for all sorts of different things. And most of the teachers that she hired were, like her, formerly one-room school teachers who knew how to individualize instruction because they've had to do that. She always used to value compassion in her teachers more than formal education. One time she had to fire a teacher that she had just hired a few hours earlier because she overheard this teacher saying to a student, "I can't believe someone could have reached your age without knowing this." That was not the way they treated things at Opportunity School. In the early years of the school, one evening, a young man got up to recite something in class and he fainted dead away. And when they revived him, they found out that the reason he had fainted was that he had gone straight to work first thing in the morning and straight from work to Opportunity School and hadn't eaten all day. And Emily suspected that this was the case with many of her students because they were squeezing this education in whenever they could when they were not at work. And so her mother began making mass quantities of soup, which she and Florence brought to the school every day in pails on the trolley car down Colfax Street and then served in the basement.
As you can imagine, Emily carrying 2 5-gallon buckets of soup on the streetcar, wearing an ostrich-plumed hat, and of course a beautiful, gorgeous dress.
And she and Florence and her mother carried this on for about a year. And then an unknown wealthy woman in town took over having them send meat and vegetables and things to the school every day, and the culinary students there at Opportunity then began providing the soup every day from then on. So she didn't have to bring it in a pail anymore.
We still make 2 fresh soups every day in honor of Emily Griffith. And on her birthday, we serve the entire student body and staff free soup for the day to celebrate her birthday in February.
The courses they've offered over the decades, I think, are wonderful because they're very telling about the time and society.
And I think it was over 100 different trades you could pursue. It's really a trade school.
There were night schools in barbering and millinery and clothes making and welding and auto repair.
They were one of the first schools in the country to offer auto mechanics. 1917, when not that many people had automobiles. One of the first to recognize that beautician and beauty salons were going to be a thing. They were one of the first to offer that as well. So I think she would have been right behind, you know, the computer things that they offer now, AutoCAD with the architecture, all of that. In the early years, the big high-tech thing was typewriting. And in the very first week of enrollment, 100 people signed up for typewriting, and they only had 1 typewriter. And one of them that I loved was Mend the Run in a Silk Stocking. 136 people took that year. So, you know, that's telling, because in the Depression, you're not going to be throwing away your silk stockings.
The teens, 20s, and 30s were turbulent times in Colorado. The 19-teens were punctuated by the First World War.
She was very adaptive. For instance, during wartime, there were classes that helped support that. You see pictures of women in automotive. There was a class in shipbuilding, believe it or not, that was a response to some wartime efforts. So there are incredible cataloging, if you will, of courses that were offered throughout the last 100 years.
And at the end of that war, there was a real reaction in America against immigrants and against foreign influences. Emily Griffith was trying to navigate all of that, navigate the fear and the xenophobia that Americans developed after the war.
Emily ran her Opportunity School from 1916 till she retired from there in 1934. And this is a tumultuous time to do this. We also see in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan dominated Denver and Colorado politics. Now, they weren't just satisfied disenfranchising African Americans from their rights, but all immigrants, especially Roman Catholics and Jews. And so she had a lot of problems dealing with this.
Anybody who didn't fit the profile of what they saw as a white, Protestant, natural-born citizen. Emily Griffith didn't see people that way. And her formula although, like the Klan, embraced the idea of Americanization, was an inclusive formula and not an exclusive formula like the Klan's.
After World War II, when all these veterans were returning and needed some skills to return to the civilian workforce, one of the popular programs was raising foxes for fur.
Fur and then mink. Colorado actually went through a mini mink ranching boom in the 1940s and 50s as a result of the Emily Griffith School courses.
And that's why we have a problem with red foxes in Colorado now. They're not native here.
Emily Griffith looked out for women, what kind of trades there were, what kind of job openings there were for them.
Then there was a class called millinery. So I had to look that one up, and it was hat making.
And I always have my suspicion that one reason for that is that just a few years earlier, Denver had finally outlawed prostitution. And I think there were a lot of fashionable young ladies looking for another vocational track. And I think millinery might have appealed to them. I don't know. This is only my suspicion. Millinery was one of the biggest programs in the early years of the school. And so Emily would always wear hats that had been made by students to advertise the millinery program. The more outrageous, the better.
And she would sell the hat off of her head. If you admired the hat, you could buy it. And then she'd wear another one another day.
She also would wear clothing that they had made in the professional sewing classes, and at every opportunity. Sometimes she would throw dinner parties at her house, completely catered by the culinary students at the school. So anytime she could think of a way to showcase, the skills and the accomplishments of the students of opportunity, she was all over it.
Against her protest, when she retired, they renamed it Emily Griffith Opportunity School. She says, don't put the spotlight on me. Put it on the students and what we're doing for them. I do not want this recognition.
Emily taught at Opportunity School from 1916 when it opened till 1933 when she retired. People thought that she was retiring early because they didn't know her actual age. In truth, she was 65. And in reality, she'd been teaching, starting on the prairie for more than 50 years. And she was tired. More than 100,000 students at that point, by 1933, had gone through the school. She knew if she stayed in Denver that she would be overwhelmed by trying to meet the needs of so many others. So she and Florence moved to a little community up Coal Creek Canyon called Pine Cliff. It's just a little mountain resort town. And they lived in a rustic log cabin that had been built for them by a very dear friend and former Opportunity School carpentry teacher. His name was Fred Lundy.
In June of 1947, he asked her to accompany him to a trip back to Chicago. She says, no, I can't leave my sister. I gotta care for her.
On June 18th, 1947, Emily's youngest sister, Ethelyn, and her husband, Evan, unlocks the door, steps inside, and if he had not been careful, he would have tripped over Emily's body.
It showed the investigation. They'd both been shot in the back of the head, execution style, in the back bedroom.
The crime scene was very, very weird because there was no sign of forced entry. In the kitchen, there were 2 pots of food and 3 pieces of apple pie already cut on plates, one piece substantially larger than the other 2.
Lunch was laid out on the table, but both of the sisters had been shot in an execution style, and speculation immediately gravitated towards Fred Lundy.
They found his car a half a mile away along Coal Creek. Also, there was a suicide note and a briefcase in there.
And in that briefcase is $555 in $5 and $10 bills and a note that says, to the coroner, if my body is found, use this money basically for burial expenses.
The case took an even more perplexing twist when Lundy's body was found in a river a few miles away. And the answer to the question of what happened to Emily and Florence has never been satisfactorily answered.
The shockwaves went all around the state and all around the nation because by this time Emily is well known all around the country. Why would someone want to do this to this wonderful old lady who devoted her whole life to helping others? And the theory is that it was a mercy-killing suicide. There will never be a cold case. 2 reasons. Number 1, Emily, Florence, and Fred all cremated. Nothing left. Number 2, Boulder County Sheriff's Department doesn't have the records of the case anymore.
The fact of the matter, it was very tragic in that here was a woman who helped so many individuals really succeed in life, and the fact that her life was taken the way that it was is a brutal way for a life to end, and especially a life as special and revered as Emily Griffith.
2016 celebrated the centennial. It's done a name change. It's now an Emily Griffith Technical College. 1.6 million students have passed through its doors.
As we move into this 100th year of celebrating Emily Griffith's success, I think she'd be quite proud. We now serve about 7,000 students annually, both in credit and non-credit programs. We are the lowest priced tuition value in the state of Colorado. We offer everything in our certificate programs from accounting to welding and everything in between.
The legacy of Emily Griffith is probably the legacy of America, or the ideal of America, that if you work hard, you're honest, you persevere, and given a chance of education, you could achieve whatever dreams that you want.
Given the times and the fact that she was a woman in education and in power, and the fact that she held positions such as assistant superintendent for schools, the fact that she was honored by the Kiwanians as a major influence for them, the fact that she was a founding member of the Denver Foundation. She is immortalized in stained glass at the state capitol.
What she did with her Opportunity School was a model for schools in other cities.
She always said, I'm not the person that should be congratulated for these accomplishments. It's the people who took the chance, who dedicated themselves to coming back to school. They're the ones who deserve your admiration, not me. I just gave them the opportunity.